We seem to have slowed down. That is great. Okay, so I am going to get started now because, like I say, we've got lots to go through. So good morning. Welcome to Forward Action's first webinar of 2022. We're very excited to have Beth, one of our brilliant digital strategy managers, here with us this morning, who's going to talk through a lot of her experience of testing across partners like Refuge and Cancer Research UK and Dignity in Dying. So we've got lots of insight to share with you, and hopefully there will be plenty of time for questions at the end. Before I hand over to Beth, a few bits of housekeeping. So we are going to record this webinar and we will send it out on email, so you will get it afterwards. Normally that's where you see a couple of people then drop off and go, actually, like, I've got other things to do this morning, but hopefully you will stick around, because the benefit of doing it live is that you get to ask questions as you go and to chat with other people. So there's plenty of opportunity for interaction. We'll be sending out the slides as well, so you can have a look at those in your own time. We have enabled the closed captions, so you should be able to see those. And if you can't, it's down at the bottom under the live transcript, and you can switch those on. And we will aim to speak clearly and slowly so that it catches everything that we're saying. Other things to remember is that we're using the Q&A function. So if you have any questions throughout the session, just use the Q&A function, and myself and my colleague Andrew will be responding to those. Andrew is in here as Kate, but he is Andrew just a little bit confusingly. But we'll respond to those if we can, if they're simple here, or we'll gather them together and ask Beth at the end. And normally we have some really good chat at the end of these webinars. So if you can, do stick around and join that, because it should be very informative. That is enough for me. I hope that you survived the storms last night and you're enjoying the calm between the storm today, that you have a coffee, and that you're ready to hear all about testing from Beth. I'm going to switch my video off now and come back at the end. Over to you, Beth.
Thanks, Ali. And yeah, good morning, everyone. It's lovely to see you all virtually with all your names, etc. This morning. Thanks for joining us on what is over here a gorgeous Thursday morning, very spring-like. I'm very excited about it. So today we're going to be talking about the fundamentals of testing. So you've heard from Ali, who's our partnerships director. I'm Beth, digital strategy manager here at Forward Action. And yeah, we're going to, today is basically all about testing. So thinking a little bit why you might be here. So it might be that you're not doing any A/B testing at the moment, but that you might be doing, or that you might be doing some, and you want to sort of check that what you're doing is kind of best practice. You might also be feeling like some of your campaigns could be kind of performing better than they are, but you're not totally sure where to be spending your time in terms of optimizing. So we're going to kind of talk through the kind of process and how we sort of prioritize tests a bit later on. And you might also be here to sort of see some kind of real world examples of tests that you could kind of look to run yourselves. So we've got some examples, as Ali said, from Cancer Research, Dignity in Dying and Refuge coming up a little bit later. But first things first, we're going to do a little poll, kind of get us kind of bit interactive in the morning. So I hope everyone's had their coffee. So the first poll here is basically, how are you feeling about testing at the moment on a scale of I'm a little bit scared of testing all the way up to I love testing. So if you guys want to vote on that, yeah, it'd be great to kind of see where we're all kind of at this morning.
We have a really even spread here. So there's a few testing aficionados, a few who feel confident, and then 27% of people are scared of testing, and 39% of people think testing is okay. So real spread, but hopefully by the end of it, everyone will be feeling confident about testing, if not loving it.
Brilliant. Yeah, I think welcome to everybody at whatever stage of your testing journey you're at today. And yeah, we'll ask you a little bit later on how you feel about testing after we go through a bit more of the information. So in terms of what we're going to go through today, we're going to go over the fundamentals of testing and some top tips. We'll start with what A/B testing is. We'll talk a little bit around why you should test. And then the kind of bulk of this is kind of more going to be like into the nitty gritty of how to plan, set up, run and review your tests. As mentioned, we've got some real world examples from tests that we've run with some of our partners, which will hopefully provide a bit of inspiration for you. And also we'll finish up with some kind of top tips for testing. Love alliteration. And any questions, as Ali said, at the end. Okay, so first things first, we've got a quick quiz for you here. So this is an example of a test that we ran with Sue Ryder, who's one of our partners. And we tested different messaging around the opt-in statement on one of their sign-up pages. So on the left here, we've got a framing which is kind of speaks to a sense of kind of collective power and being kind of part of a movement. And on the right, we've got messaging that speaks a little bit more around like praising someone for taking an action and then kind of using that as a route to ask them to sign up and do more and kind of hear about more ways they could get involved. So which framing do you think delivered the best opt-in rate? So collective ambition on the left or engagement focus on the right.
Polls are coming in, results coming in. It's like election night on a referendum. Very exciting. Hopefully it goes better than previous ones. So I'm going to give it 10 more seconds. We have a split of 58 to 42. So 58% think collective ambition or 43% think engagement focused. So reveal the results.
I can reveal that the majority of you were correct. So the collective ambition framing delivered an opt-in rate of 55% versus engagement focus delivering an opt-in rate of 44%. But I think this kind of sort of speaks to kind of one of the cruxes of why you should A/B test, because often we might have good instincts about things, we might have sort of opinions about things, but data doesn't lie. And that's kind of the crux of why we should sort of A/B test. So we're now going to sort of speak to what A/B testing is. So I'm going to start off with a definition from Google Optimise, which is a platform that you can use to set up A/B tests. So they categorize A/B testing as a method of comparing two versions of a web page or an app against each other to determine which of the versions performs better. And so A/B testing is an experiment, so we can all be scientists for the day, or more frequently, because testing is great. So where you would test two or more variants of a page that are shown to users at random, which is really important, and we then use statistical analysis to determine which variation performs better for the conversion goal, so what you're trying to optimize. So we've kind of got a few other bits of terminology that are sort of important to kind of testing, and we'll sort of speak to them a little bit, refer to them throughout this presentation. But the first one is hypothesis. So a hypothesis is a theory that you're testing. So an example could be if I make this sign up button green, I can expect more people to sign up because green is a more attractive color than gray. So that could be a hypothesis that you have. A variant is a version of something that you're testing. So in this case, I would be testing a green button against the control, which is the default gray button that I mentioned. The variable is a thing that you're changing. So in this instance, that would be the color of the button. And then the test metric is the thing that you're measuring. So in this case, of my example, it would be the number of people clicking the button, the click rate of that button. So these are kind of really important things to be thinking about when you're thinking about a test, and making sure that you've actually kind of ironed all of this out for the kind of planning of the test. So we've sort of spoken around what testing is, and we've spoken a little bit to why we should A/B test, but we're going to speak a bit more about that, like what's it all about, why do we do it? So the first thing, the first kind of main reason, I suppose, of testing is to basically make your pages work harder. So if you can optimize your pages, you can get more results for the exact same amount of effort, which is great. It means that you're being really efficient with your spend. You can focus on other areas of your work if you've got a really hardworking sign-up page or page where you get action page of some description. Secondly, it's really great to test and optimize the journeys that you've got live for your supporters. Often like an action page can often be like a first interaction that you have with a supporter. So the quicker that you can kind of create a good experience and generate really good sentiment and like less frustration, the more like valuable that supporter is likely going to be like to your organization, because they've had a great experience with you. And also then the next thing really is that you learn what actually works. And that's sort of what we kind of alluded to with that Sue Ryder example. Relying on your instincts and opinions about what works best doesn't always doesn't always mean you actually get to what actually truly does work best. So letting the data tell you is good, and it also can kind of often help resolve internal debate if you've got kind of bigger strategic questions in your organization, and lots of people have different views on it. Doing, setting up like really like rigorous testing can help you get to that decision, resolve that debate, and it can kind of help you move forward with your kind of campaigns or with the other stuff that you can kind of crack on with your mission. So we're going to move over now into sort of the bulk of the presentation, which is more around the nitty-gritty of setting up, running, and analysing tests. So in terms of how to get started, first things first is that you want to identify your problem. So you want to think about what are the pain points in your journeys, where do we seeing potentially a lower than average action rate, or where do we think we can kind of improve? So you kind of want to look at where the points are in the kind of user journey to do that. The second one is deciding what to test. So there are often lots and lots of things on pages that you could change, and it's sort of thinking about what are all of the things that we could potentially change that might have a positive impact on the conversion rate that we're trying to optimize, and trying to work harder for us. And then once we've got this like long list of ideas, you want to then prioritize them to make sure that the ones that you're sort of choosing to do can deliver a lot of impact, and can do it within the time frame that you're sort of like looking for. Once you've decided what you're going to test, you want to work out how you're actually going to set up the test. And then once you decided that, you can then run the test. And then once the sort of test is up and running, you want to like review the results, see if you've got to a stage where you've got statistical significance, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And then you can kind of implement the results, and you've kind of taken a step forward in terms of optimizing where you're at. So firstly, as I mentioned, you need to identify the problems or opportunities, if you're a glass half full kind of person, where you can kind of improve your conversion rate. So this is an example here of like a typical acquisition journey that we might work with a partner on. So we've got a user will kind of interact, a supporter will interact with your organization through a Facebook ad, which will direct people to a sign up page. And then onwards to taking further actions such as donating or sharing a petition, or anything else that is kind of an important kind of action for your organization. And then for those people that have opted in, we'll often send them down a welcome series, and then on into your kind of ongoing email program. But within this journey, there are lots of different areas where you could improve the conversion rates. So it could be at the point in which someone's interacting with a Facebook ad, not enough people are clicking through, and that could be a pain point. It could be that on the sign up page, not enough people are signing up, and or not enough people are opting in to receive further communication from you. It could be at the point in which you're asking someone to take another action. They might not enough people might not be taking the action that you're asking them to take. So, for example, a donate rate might be below kind of your sort of industry benchmarks, etc., and you might sort of see that as an opportunity. Or it might be that once you've got someone onto your email list and you're kind of sending them emails, they might not be opening emails, or even if they are opening emails, they might not be kind of then interacting with the content, and they're not clicking through and taking further action. So there's lots of it's really exciting. There's always lots of things that you could test. And I think it's kind of thinking about, and we'll talk about this now, but sort of actually getting down to like what you should actually decide to test. So you basically need to decide what your goal is. So for example, this could be that you want more people to opt in to receive emails, or it could be, for example, that you want to increase the donate rate on your page. And then you want to think a little bit more about what tests are actually going to deliver that. So we've kind of identified two levers that you can kind of pull to increase your conversion rate. So the first one is sort of around people's motivations. So sort of kind of encouraging people to want to take the action. It's kind of much more sort of around sort of kind of like being like creating a kind of like emotional response. And then the second one is more around ensuring that you're making it as easy as possible for the supporter to take an action. So that's kind of making sure that the user journey and the experience is really like simplistic, and you're really clear with like the supporter what it is that you're asking them to take. So in terms of some examples of those types of tests that you could run to sort of increase those two sort of levers, in terms of increasing users' motivation, you can test various things. Often we would sort of recommend testing things, again, that kind of have not play, but like have that kind of more pull on people's kind of emotions. So you can often do that in using different messaging and different framings. So we've sort of spoken about that before. Some people will really respond to kind of a sense of community, whereas some people will really respond to being praised for having taken an action and sort of being brought along that journey. Can also use kind of emotive imagery. Testing that is kind of a way to sort of to kind of appeal to people's emotions. Also using social proof, so showing the number of people who have already taken an action is often a good thing to test, and different things around social proofing to sort of try and drive and sort of tap into that kind of feeling of sort of wanting to be part of something bigger. And also kind of using urgency messaging where you can, so kind of creating a sense of urgency either around a sort of a timely kind of moment, or trying to give the supporter a reason for why they should take this action right now, is often like a way that you can kind of increase a user's motivation. And then in terms of looking at making an action easier to take, you could basically test lots of different things here as well, such as removing extra steps. So making it so that the supporter has fewer things that they have to do in order to complete the action, is one way that you could do that. But also asking the user to do one thing at a time, so not having 3 asks on a page, and just doing it one and then asking them to do another thing, so they're sort of not feeling overwhelmed, and you kind of laid something out really simplistically and kind of kept copy and the kind of the page layout really succinct. And often making sure that your pages are mobile optimized is really important here as well, and something to kind of work towards, given that we know lots of people are typically kind of using their phones over their sort of desktops for things. So that's kind of gives you kind of a bit of food for thought, I suppose, around some of the different kind of levers that you can pull in terms of increasing your action rates, and sort of a little bit more detail around like some of the things that you could actually take away to sort of think about testing yourself. The next thing that's really important when you're looking and you're thinking about what to test is ensuring that you've got a strong hypothesis. So for example, so this is kind of how you can kind of lay out a hypothesis. But yeah, looking at our kind of earlier Sue Ryder opt-in copy example. So our hypothesis there would be, if we test an opt-in copy that talks more about collective engagement and kind of community sort of action, then we will see a better opt-in rate, because people will feel more like they are part of something and they want to join the community. So it's always really important to start your testing with a hypothesis, because you sort of basically want to evaluate the results and rule in or out your hypothesis, and that's kind of like the crux of testing. In terms of getting started, one way that we would kind of recommend, one thing that I find quite useful doing is actually sort of mapping out the page that you're looking to optimize, and actually looking at all of the different things that you could potentially test. So this is an example of a sign up page from Refuge, and here you can kind of see that there are lots of different areas that you could test. So we could kind of create more urgency in the headline copy on the sign up page by saying something like act now, for example. We could use a different image, so we could test having different images. Maybe, for example, a woman looking directly to camera could be an image that you could test here. We might want to look at cutting down the copy on the page so that people have to read less. We're making it easier for them to take the action. There are other things that we could test, such as the button copy. Would having a green button drive more people to actually add their name? Opt-in copy, we know, is a really important test. So what can we do there in terms of the opt-in copy? And can we simplify the form itself? Do we really need to capture all of this data? If we don't, the fewer form fields that we've got, it's probably likely to improve our action rate. So it's great to kind of set it out like this when you're sort of thinking about testing, write up a long list, and then that's when you want to start prioritizing your ideas. So in terms of prioritizing your test ideas, our kind of recommendation would be to sort of categorize them based on the amount of effort that they might take versus the impact that they could have on the results. So sometimes we use a matrix where we give each test idea a score, which is an impact score out of 5 or 10, minus an effort score out of 5 or 10. And then we would have a list of tests that have a score, and those that have got the highest are the ones that we would likely work through first. So basically this is here, which is where you sort of want to focus. So tests that basically have high impact but are kind of low effort to set up are your sort of creme de la creme tests. And then the tests that are very high effort and kind of low impact are sort of ones that you probably don't really want to focus on, because you're going to spend a lot of time and maybe not really, deliver that much for the effort that you're putting in. So it's quite good to sort of think about your tests and categorize them in this way, and that can kind of provide clarity about how to think about planning your tests. So next up, when you've decided sort of where you're testing, what you've decided what you're going to test, you've prioritized it, you've got your plan of action, and then you sort of need to think about how you're actually going to set your tests up. So we typically run tests across different touch points, that we've kind of highlighted here. So paid social, typically kind of Facebook ads, we run tests on that. We also run tests on kind of organizations' sort of websites, sign-up pages, that kind of thing. And then we also run tests on email. And there are kind of slightly different methodologies for testing across those different platforms that I'm going to go through now. So testing in paid social. So in terms of kind of setting this up, there are lots of things that you can kind of test within your kind of paid social campaigns. Things that we typically test would be different audiences, different kind of ad creative, so both imagery and copy. They're kind of some of the key things that we would test. So in terms of kind of setting up a test in sort of paid social, one of the things that we kind of recommend doing is creating a different ad set for the different variables that you're testing. So for example, if you wanted to test, and we would kind of strongly recommend testing a very broad audience to give as many people the opportunity to take the action as possible. But you also might know that you've had success in previous campaigns with an interest-based audience, so people that are interested in your cause and things like that. Or you might have an audience of donors, for example, that have been really highly engaged on Facebook before. So what you might want to do in that case is you set up your ads campaign, and then you will create a different ad set for each of the things that you're testing, which in this instance is your different audiences. And then in terms of kind of how to then sort of fairly test those different variables to those audiences, you would want to set the same budget across each of the ad sets and the same time frame too, so that you're basically allowing the same opportunity for conversions across the different variables that you're testing. And then that means that you can kind of be sure that the results that you get are kind of fair, because you've allowed every variable the same opportunity. One kind of pro tip for Facebook kind of Facebook advertising A/B testing is that for campaigns that you set live, you tend to need 50 conversions for the campaign to leave, for the ad set, to leave learning phase. In the learning phase, Facebook isn't properly optimized at that stage. So I think it's just wanting to make sure that you have a sense of what the cost per the conversion is going to be, and that you've got a budget that is going to allow you to have those 50 conversions, so that you're kind of able for Facebook to sort of leave the learning phase, start doing its optimization thing, and then you can kind of be more sure about the results. So that's what testing in paid social. Testing on page. So this is basically where you have, for example, a sign up page, and you want to run a test where you're changing the image on the page. So what you would do here is you would have your control, and you would set this then up as a split test. So lots of you can just create a second. So how you would do that, is that you would create a second version of your control page, which is the page that you have currently live, and then you would just change the thing that you're testing, the variable that you're testing. In this example, you would just switch out the image on the page for the new one that you want to test. And then you would basically set it up so that the traffic is split 50-50 between each of those pages. So you can either do that, lots of platforms such as Engaging Networks have the ability for you to be able to set up a split test there. So you would add both the pages into a test, and then anyone who came to either of those pages would be redirected, split equally between, traffic would be split equally between the two variants. But you could also set that up in Facebook. For example, you could have your ad set which is pushing to one page, and your ad set that's pushing to another page, and as long as you've got the same time frame and the budget that we just discussed, you can kind of be set it up in that way as well, if you don't sort of have the ability to set up a split test in the platform that you've got. In terms of a kind of pro tip for sort of testing on page, I sort of mentioned around traffic, but for some tests, you need to sort of have a bit of a think about what it is that you're testing and how much traffic you might need to go to the page in order to get enough data to be able to make an informed decision on whether something has or hasn't worked. So for example, for sign-up pages, we tend to be able to push quite a lot of traffic to them, and because it's quite a low bar ask for someone, for example, to take a petition or just add their email address in, for example, if you've optimized the page and you've got fewer form fields, etc., then we can get quite a lot of people through quite quickly. But if you're doing a test on your donate page, you often will either need to find a way to boost the traffic to that page, because donate conversion rates tend to be quite low, or you might have to leave the test running for a longer period of time to ensure that you're building up enough results to be able to make a call on whether something has or hasn't worked. So that's just sort of something to think about in terms of how you plan tests. It could be for donate testing, if you've got a bunch of ideas that you want to be able to implement for your Christmas campaign, for example. You might want to start implementing those donate tests now so that you can kind of run them for a long period of time, get your learnings before you then implement them for your Christmas campaign. So it's just sort of something to think about when you're planning tests. And then next up is testing on emails. So here again, we would probably set this up as a split test. And again, the methodology of that is that you have your control, and then you will clone that, and you'll just change the one thing that you are wanting to test. And then it's really important to sort of send your emails at the same amount of time, at the same time, of day, so that you're kind of trying to take out anything that could kind of bias your results, in any way. One thing that is really easy to do and quick and easy to set up in email testing is subject line testing, but it's not always the most effective. So there are other sort of tests that you can do, such as adding an image in, or different images, also donate prompts in fundraising emails, for example, or there could kind of be some other kind of more outside the box tests that could drive more value for you. And I've got an example of an email test that Refuge have done, which is sort of speaks a bit more to that, which is kind of a bit more sort of out of the box. We've seen some good results, which I will go through with you shortly. So that's sort of setting up your tests. The next part of setting up your tests, and I've sort of spoken a little bit to it, is making sure that they're fair and reliable. So they're sort of two key words that you need to know for testing. So what do they really mean? So a fair test is a test that is set up where the result isn't biased. And typically how you can do that is just setting up a test and just changing one thing at a time. The reason for doing that is if you set up more than one thing, you can't be sure that you know what it is exactly is having an impact on your results. So for example, if you tested, you have your control page, and then you're testing both changing the button copy and also the color of the button, it could be, and you might see then a positive result in people clicking the button. It could be that the color of the button is actually having a negative impact, but the button copy is having a better impact that is better than the negative impact. So overall, you're seeing a positive increase in your action rate, but you could actually see a bigger increase in your action rate if you hadn't changed the color of the button. So testing one thing at a time and then iterating on the better performer is the best way to sort of manage your tests to make sure that they're fair. And then in terms of reliability, that basically means that you can repeat the result that you've got from a test. So we would typically recommend running a test more than once, twice as a minimum. And it's also, you want to make sure that the result that you've got is statistically significant. And I will talk a little bit more around what I mean by that and how we can calculate that in a couple of slides' time. So you set your tester, brilliant. So now it's time to review the results. So here is an example of some test data for a kind of an opt-in copy test that we've ran. So you want to identify what your key metric is, and you'll have done that when you're sort of thinking about your hypothesis. So the hypothesis here is the variant copy for this opt-in test is more emotive, and therefore we're going to deliver a higher opt-in rate. That was our hypothesis for this test. What we can actually see here is that the opt-in rate for the variant that we were hoping was going to improve our results actually led to a decrease in the opt-in rate of nearly 10%. So it's just kind of a lesson that sometimes when you test, you don't meet your hypothesis, and that is fine because you've learned something. And this test result was statistically significant because, and you can see this on the right-hand side, it had a p-value of below 0.1. So I can't hear you all crying out, what is statistical significance? But I can imagine there might be some of you that are thinking about that. So we're going to talk about what that is now. So statistical significance calculations tell us how likely it is that our test result is solely due to error or not. So for example, the bigger the sample size that you have, so the more traffic you can get to your page and you've got loads of people taking an action, the lower the impact on error because you've got way more data that is providing you the results. It kind of like the trends, can kind of map up to the trends there. And then the bigger the difference in performance between the variants, the less likely the result will be due to error. So for example, if you've got an opt-in rate of 70% versus an opt-in rate of 30%, you don't need as many people to have gone through that journey because the difference between those two opt-in rates is so vast that you can be much more sure that it was not due to error. In terms of working out statistical significance, we use something called chi-square to test. You don't need to be a maths wizard for this. We actually use an online calculator, which I think, Andrew, you might be dropping that in the chat. If not, we can send that round later. But that basically is a calculator where you can plug in the number, like the traffic of people that have been given the opportunity to take an action, and then the number of people that have actually taken the action, and that calculates whether the difference that you see between your control and your variant is statistically significant or not. We look for a p-value, we're comfortable with a p-value of below 0.1 as being statistically significant. And what that means is that there is a 10% or below 10% chance that our result is down to error, and a 90% chance that the result that we're seeing is due to the thing that we're testing. So we can feel really confident that if we're getting a statistically significant result, that we can look to implement this because it's a true result, and it's like not down to error or anything else, any bias based on how the test was set up. In terms of how you can use chi-square for working out statistical significance, it's something that you can use for email open, click and unsubscribe rates. And it's also something that you can use for action rates, so such as the percentage of people that have donated on a page, or a click-through rate, or a sign-up, opt-in rate, for example. What it doesn't work for is like averages. So for example, looking at average gifts that you might have on different donate pages. There's a secondary tool that you can use called the Mann-Whitney tool. And that is something where you basically would plug in all of the donations that you've got for that page, and it will calculate the significance and kind of ruling out kind of outliers and things like that. So that's just sort of a little note on what you can use to work out statistical significance for different types of tests that you're running. So in a nutshell, we're looking for happy Drake. We want fair, reliable tests that have clear, statistically significant results that we're then able to implement. So yeah, that's what we're looking for. We don't want bias, we don't want unreliability, and we don't want to implement results that aren't statistically significant. There are a few sort of cardinal sins we've got here of testing. The first one is changing too many things at once. I've spoken a little bit around that, but the kind of best way to set up testing is just to change one thing and start iterating on the better performers. It's much easier for you to kind of evaluate the data, and you can be much more sure that the data is accurate and the results that you're getting are that are able to be implemented. The second one here is making sure that you're leaving enough time, make sure that you're leaving enough time to get a result. I spoke a little bit to that around donate testing pre a Christmas campaign. For action rates where you tend to see a lower action rate, you want to allow enough time for you to be able to get to a statistically significant result and get enough traffic through to take that action. So it's just sort of something to think about when you're planning. And another kind of cardinal sin is not putting tracking in place to be able to read your results. So you just want to make sure that you're able to get all of your test metrics and get to those data points so that you're able to actually evaluate your tests. And that's really important. Okay, so before we go into some examples of tests that we've run with partners, we're going to do another poll. So this is, how do you feel about testing now on a scale of boo hiss testing to testing is my new best friend?
The good news is that so far, not wishing to sway the polls, there's no boo hiss testing. Everyone is feeling very positive. Testing is good. Testing is my new best friend. And a couple of people think testing is fine. So maybe still work to convince them with some brilliant examples, Beth.
No pressure then. But yes, I'm glad that people are feeling much more positive. Cool. So yeah, we're going to speak to a couple of tests that we really recommend rolling out. That we've kind of worked with other partners in the past. So one, I've already spoken to it in terms of kind of opt-in copy tests and the difference that you can sort of see in literally just tweaking the copy before you're asking someone to opt in. So here we've got an example from Dignity in Dying, where we tested that community-focused variant that we saw perform well with Sue Ryder against a more kind of urgency action focused framing. I won't allow you to vote on this one, just in the interest of time, but the urgency framing actually went out here. So again, this is kind of a sort of example, kind of iterative testing. You can kind of learn things from other tests that you run, and then you can think about how you can improve upon that result. So here, the urgency kind of thing delivered a 66% opt-in rate versus a 60% opt-in rate. What's really great in terms of opt-in copy tests, they can be really impactful because you can often drive a good volume of people to the sign-up page through quite a low ad spend, get a result that you're able to implement, and then you can put much more of your budget behind pushing traffic to the better performer, which is where you're going to generate as many opt-ins as possible from that page at a cheaper cost, which is, it's really, really impactful test to run. The next test here is one that we ran with Cancer Research UK, and it pulls on that lever that we've spoken about before, which is about making the action as easy as possible to take. So here you can see on the left hand side, we had a sign up page that had quite a lot of form fields on the page, and then we've tested reducing that down just to 3 to see kind of what the performance was in terms of the percentage of people signing up. So what we saw here is that nearly 30% more people signed up on the page that had fewer form fields. So if this is something, if you can have a think about your forms, and if there's any data there that isn't mandatory and isn't required, that you're not really using, it's quite good practice to sort of think about which ones you can strip out to make it much quicker for the supporter to take the action that you want them to take. Testing imagery is also really important here in Facebook advertising, and more generally on pages and in emails. This is an example from Refuge where we tested 2 different images, and we basically looked at what the performance was on the cost per acquisition of somebody clicking through from this ad and then opting in on a sign up page. And what we could see is that the image on the right of the kind of which is really, really emotive of a woman in sort of black and white, delivered a cheaper cost per acquisition, 10% cheaper. And then an example of kind of iterative testing is what we did here, where we basically said, okay, well, this image has performed really well. How can we make it work harder for us? So what we looked at doing here was adding a sort of button kind of sort of overlay graphic on the image, and that then drove a further 23% reduction in the cost per acquisition of this ad. So again, it's just thinking about how you're testing, what the test results are telling you, and then how can you further optimize. And this was really low, really low effort for us to implement, but the impact was really high. So this is sort of an example of that kind of way of kind of prioritizing tests. So image and opt-in copy are very simple to set up, and often you can reap really good rewards from doing these types of tests. And then the kind of final test example that we've got here is one that was I alluded to earlier, which was a bit more of a kind of outside the box email test. So here, it's a really interesting test that we ran in a fundraising email with Refuge. It's not explicitly an A/B test, I hope you'll forgive me, but basically we ran a test where we wanted to test that kind of framing of asking a supporter to make a donation. So we asked supporters to cover the cost of a school uniform, or to go halves with someone else. And our hypothesis, I think, was that having a kind of go halves would create that sort of sense of community. It was a lesser amount of money, and we might see lots more people sort of donating at that level. What we actually saw was that twice as many people wanted to cover the cost of the school uniform on their own. So the sort of social proof of being like, I can do this on my own, and other people might be doing it and donating that amount of money, actually encourage more people to do that. And this particular email had an average gift that was £22 higher than the kind of average across our kind of email program of Refuge. So it shows that social proof really does work, and it was quite an interesting sort of out of the box kind of email test that we tried that delivered really great results. So finally, we've got some kind of top testing tips. It's very hard to say on having just had one coffee this morning. We've covered what testing is. We've covered why we test. We've covered how to test and some examples of tests that you could kind of take away and kind of run with. And then we've got a couple of just the top tips, and then we can kind of jump into any questions. So just a kind of recap. To start, you need to identify your problem. What are your pain points? What conversion rates are you trying to improve? Once you've got that down, you can start thinking about the two different levers of how you can kind of affect that change and improve that conversion rate. So the first one being, how can you improve supporter motivation? How can you make them want to do it? And then the second one is, how can you make it easier for them to do it? Once you've kind of got that down, that sort of will provide you a bit of a springboard to think about all of the different things that you can test. It's great to sort of create that long list, think about the page itself, think about the journeys, think about all the things that you could test, put them down. And then what you want to do is prioritize them using that sort of matrix of how much effort is this going to take, and is it worth doing from an impact perspective. The ones that the ones that are the creme de la creme are the ones that are very high impact and low effort. That's sort of what you want to be focusing your energy on. You then, once you sort of landed on your test, you need to sort of work out how you're going to set it up, make sure that you know what metrics you're looking for, make sure you've got your tracking sorted out, and then you can set the test up and run it. And then once your test is live, we typically probably recommend checking back on a test within sort of like 5 to 7 days of it going live, seeing if you've got any statistically significant results. If you have, brilliant. That means you can implement something and you can move on to your next test. If you don't, no worries. It might be that you need to think about ways to boost the traffic to the page, or it might be just that you're comfortable with the test running for longer because it's a slightly lower volume test, and that's also fine. In terms of some final couple of rules to live by, firstly, think about your page traffic. If it's something that you want to test on a donate page, what is your average traffic to the page? What are your kind of conversion rates that you typically see? And you can have a bit of a think about how long it might take you to get a statistically significant result. Like, are there things that you can do to promote traffic to that page, such as, can you do a small series of fundraising emails that are going to push people to that page? You're going to boost traffic over a kind of week or 2 weeks, and then you might be able to get kind of some results on your test more quickly. It's really exciting when you get a statistically significant result, but if the implementation of that is quite a lot of effort, such as like needing to change like a page layout or something like that, you want to sort of think that you're really sure of the results. So running something multiple times is really important before you make big kind of strategic decisions that are high effort for you to sort of implement. And then finally, not all tests will lead to an improvement. And sometimes you don't get a statistically significant result. And that's just totally part of the process. And it's kind of why we test. So having some data and having some knowledge of how things do or don't perform is always a step forward. And you know, don't be disheartened by not getting a statistically significant result straight away. Or if you don't get one at all, that is totally fine. And you've already got a long list of other things that you can test. So yeah, they're kind of our sort of, top tips. So I think that is everything that we've got to kind of go through today. So I think, Ali, are you going to jump in with some of the questions that we might have?
Yes, I am. Thank you so much, Beth. I hope everyone found that as enjoyable, informative as I did. It was a delight of a way to start Thursday. So we have lots of questions, which I've tried to group into some different themes. And starting off, looking at the strategy for testing, and a couple of questions about, we talked a little bit about kind of the impact and effort framework, but is there anything more you can say about kind of tips about deciding which things to prioritize, and particularly looking at which tests are going to have the highest impact? How would you go around choosing that?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I think there's you sort of basically want to identify what your key goals are. I think it could be that you, at this moment in time, fundraising is much more important to you as an organization than acquisition, for example. So it might be that you want to decide that you have that higher goal, and then you want to think about all the ways that you can improve the performance of your donate pages. And almost sometimes it's quite useful to sort of identify a singular goal, and then that's when you want, and then identify everything that you can do to sort of almost have a priority testing question within a month. That's sort of something that we're looking to kind of do a bit more of, I think, which is, so basically having these more kind of top line strategic questions. Do I want to improve donate rate? Do I want to improve like the sign up rate on my page? They're two very big ones. There are loads of things that you can do. And then what you can basically think about is, I think instinctually you probably do have some ideas around what could deliver high impact. For example, the button color of a donate button versus different donate prompt amounts. I think in that instance, we could probably be, if we were to, for example, trade people up into higher donate prompt amounts, that's going to probably deliver more value to you than changing like the button copy of a donate button color. Sorry. So I think you will have a sense of things that are really impactful. And I think, having that kind of matrix and then allowing yourself enough time to plan tests and sort of having these kind of bigger strategic questions and like lining up your tests to answer that question before you then once it's been answered, you can then move on to a second sort of strategic question. It might be that for 3 months, you focus on your donations testing, and then for the next 3 months, you focus on your acquisition testing. That might be sort of a way that you do it. Or you could say, we always want to have a donate page test and an acquisition test live at any one time as well. That could be another way that you could kind of plan stuff.
Brilliant, thank you. Got a couple of questions here around email testing, and kind of, firstly, is there a minimum number of people to send an A/B test to? So for example, if an organization only has kind of 1,000 on their subscriber list, can they still do testing? And second part of that question is, does subject line testing still work with open rates no longer being reliable due to Apple changes?
Yeah, both great questions. I think you can definitely still test with a smaller sample size. I think what you basically want to do is you can have a smaller sample size and work towards statistical significant results if the things that you're testing are likely to drive a really big difference. So for example, having an image, like testing having an image versus not having an image might not be kind of a big enough of a change in an email to have a big differential in terms of what it is that in terms of the action rate. So I think when you have smaller sample sizes, you basically want to create tests where the control and the variant are really different. because then it's more likely in that instance that, for example, if it was a donate ask, if one of them got a 10% donate rate and another one got a 70% donate rate, because the two things were so different and it drove such a big difference in terms of the action rate, it's more likely that you're going to get sort of statistical significance and sort of be able to implement things. There is also, maybe we can send it around after, there's also a sample size calculator, where you can basically plug in your sample size. You can also then plug in the percentage of change between the action rate, if that makes sense, and then it will give you a number of results that you need to get, and that can be quite a useful tool in sort of thinking about how what you can test and how kind of different the tests need to be, that kind of thing. In terms of subject line testing, we still do it. I think it is obviously much more tricky now with the open rates, in terms of what we can and kind of can't see. I think that there are more impactful tests and subject line testing. So I do think with email testing, it is probably better to look at other options if you can, just because you're likely to drive more impact through the content once someone's opened them.
Yeah, I think we tend to think of subject line tests as kind of optimizing each individual send, and it's good practice to make sure you're getting as many people opening as possible, but you might not be able to draw trends out that you should then always apply. So you're not looking to kind of find a long-term learning, which is what a lot of this is talking about. Okay, moving on from emails, there's a couple of questions which are similar around kind of the size of audience for kind of page testing and how long to leave those live. So I think, is there, what you were saying about email, does that also apply to kind of when you're running a test on a web page or something? How long do you decide how to leave it up for?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a few sort of things I would sort of recommend. We typically, for a kind of test for acquisition, so for example, if we were to we've come up with two different sign-up pages. We want to test which one drives the most sign-ups. That's what our test is. It's a framings test. We would typically spend about £300 per test. So on each of the framings over about a week long, between somewhere between sort of 4 to sort of 7 days. And we would tend to see enough results to rule in or rule out framings from an acquisition perspective. That feels quite sort of, hopefully that's quite tangible. I think, for example, with donate page testing, we typically would leave that running for a much longer time frame, and we have a bit of a rule of thumb that you would maybe want to have 20 donations per variant, which should give you somewhere near your kind of statistical significance, and that's a bit of a rule of thumb that we have. So if you can think about what your donate page is, the rough average traffic that you get to the page, you'll be able to calculate how long it will take you to get up to that 20 donations, if that makes sense. That will give you an idea. And if you're like, oh, it's going to take me 6 weeks, and you're not happy with that, maybe that's when you think, okay, can I send a donation drive email? Can we do a mini donation appeal across the next 3 weeks, which will push way more traffic to this page, and therefore we're going to get to our results quicker.
Brilliant, thank you. And I think we've got time for just one more question. So any questions that we haven't got to, we can take a look at, and we can put some answers in the follow-up email as well. So we should hopefully get to answer all of those. But the last question I've got here is from someone who has been using Google Optimize to improve the UX of their homepage, but actually the test version has changed the volume of traffic to different pages. And therefore the senior leadership team are getting startled and concerned that kind of it's changing their website. And so and it's led to a drop of traffic in some pages. And so do we have any advice on how to better set expectations for testing in the future?
So I'm not sure I totally actually understand the question.
So I think what's happened is that they've kind of created a test variant. I've seen this happen in other organizations. You create a test variant, and suddenly the impact of that test means that while something may be performing better, it's had a negative impact on something else. And so maybe there's more traffic going to the About Us page, but there's less traffic going to the Donate page or something like that, or flip side. And how do you make sure that the organization is on board, or the right people are on board with what you're trying to test and achieve and potential outcomes?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. It's a great question, and it is something that can be tricky. I think sort of with testing, we sort of, there isn't always we test to get the data, so we know one way or another, I suppose. So I think in terms of setting expectations, I think it sounds as though like reviewing things quite quickly and being able to get to a stage where you can sort of then have evaluate the impact of the test versus the control in terms of your kind of like more strategic goals is probably kind of the best way you can manage that, and setting up expectations up front with your kind of organization around the fact that testing won't always lead to an increase of the conversion rate, but you've gone through the steps of analyzing what you think is going to be impactful and low effort and sort of prioritizing those ones. You've been as strategic as you can be, but ultimately the point of testing is that you don't actually know, and that's why you run the test to see if it does or doesn't improve. And I think it's sort of setting that up front, being like, we've done all this, all of this strategic thinking around what we're going to test, how we're going to set up the tests, having a testing plan in place where maybe you can get to some of the ones where you can get the results more quickly. You might want to prioritize those ones, for example, where you can rule in and rule out things to start setting a kind of testing precedent within your organization. If you can start running through a few tests and getting results and sort of sharing those, that might kind of put you in kind of good stead. But I think ultimately setting it up that testing is something that we do to try and optimize, but we never know until we get the data if it's going to improve or not.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point around the culture of testing and creating that within your organization, because we're not ever going to get to a necessarily like perfect version. It's iterative, and the idea that if that test has a knock-on impact on something else, then you look at reviewing that as well. I think I'd add to that just being really clear about what is the objective of your test at the outset and making sure everyone's aligned on that. And hopefully that's helpful. Thank you so much, Beth. That was brilliant. On one cup of coffee, I think that was a fantastic webinar. I hope everyone else has enjoyed it. We've had some lovely positive feedback. If you have any more questions about testing, please do get in touch with me or Beth on the hello@ email, and have a great day, everyone. We will wrap this up now. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.